He was never supposed to lead a nation. Not at 20. Not at 30. Not with the world watching. Yet in the heart of West Africa, amid chaos, fear, and the collapse of an entire region, a young captain stepped out of the shadows and faced enemies far older and far larger than himself. Some call him a revolutionary. Some called him a savior. Some called him a threat. But one thing is certain. Ibrahim Traoré became the kind of figure history creates only once in a generation. This is his rise. Every era produces characters that feel larger than life. Leaders who ignite nations. Figures who polarize the world. Men whose stories sound less like history and more like myth. Che Guevara. Thomas Sankara. Ataturk. Mandela. And now, in the 21st century, a new name began echoing through the Sahel. Ibrahim Traoré. Young. Disciplined. Sharp. Unpredictable. And utterly unafraid. To some, he is the embodiment of hope. To others, a symbol of resistance. To all, a reminder that courage still finds its way into the modern world. But before the uniforms, before the speeches, before the headlines, there was a boy, walking dusty roads under the endless Burkina Faso sun. This is where the legend begins. Burkina Faso. A land of quiet strength. A nation carved by drought, adversity, and an unbreakable spirit. The Sahel winds carve through the earth like ancient scars. And villages rise from red soil as if grown directly from the continent itself. Life here is never soft. Temperatures climb. Rainfall fails. Communities rely on each other because there is little else to rely on. In such places, boys grow up fast. Responsibility begins early. Courage is not a choice, it's survival. And in this harsh cradle, a young Ibrahim learned discipline, endurance, loyalty to the land, and the unspoken rule of the Sahel. When danger comes, you do not look away. These lessons dug deep into him. Long before the world learned his name. When Ibrahim entered the military academy, he didn't walk in with the swagger of a future leader. He walked in with the quiet focus of someone who had already seen enough hardship to understand the value of strength. He rose quickly. Not because he chased power, but because he carried an intensity that made others pay attention. He studied strategy with obsession, trained with precision, and earned respect not through volume, but through discipline. In a region fractured by militant violence, where villages vanished overnight, and families fled endlessly southward, the armed forces were not just a career. They were a shield. And Ibrahim was determined to be part of that shield. He fought not for glory, but for the land that raised him. But deep beneath the uniform, the seeds of something much larger were forming. Burkina Faso entered a dark chapter. Insurgent groups expanded across the Sahel like a spreading wildfire. Villages fell. Roads became dangerous. Markets emptied. Fear replaced routine. And the government struggled to keep control. Burkina Faso, a nation that once lived in relative quiet, became one of the epicenters of global conflict. People whispered, "Who will save us? Who will stand against forces this powerful? Who will protect the land when governments cannot?" The country didn't need a politician. It needed a protector. Soldiers began losing trust in leadership. The people began losing trust in the state. And in the middle of this chaos, a young officer's resolve hardened like steel. Ibrahim saw the disorder. He saw villages abandoned. He saw his people desperate. And silently, he carried their suffering as his own. History does not warn you before it chooses you. It arrives suddenly. And asks whether you are willing to step forward. By 2022, Burkina Faso had been shaken by one military change. Yet the insurgency continued to escalate. People cried out for security. For stability. For someone young enough. Ruthless enough. Focused enough. To face the threat head-on. And on a September morning that began like any other. Rumblings inside the military reached a breaking point. The nation braced itself. The world watched. And Ibrahim Traoré, captain, son of the Sahel, quiet student of discipline, found himself standing before a crossroads far larger than the military rank he held. A path that would demand sacrifice, danger, and the weight of an entire nation upon his shoulders. This was the moment destiny placed its hand on him. And he stepped into it. Burkina Faso did not wake to sunlight that morning. It woke to tension. The kind of tension that coils through a city before anyone says a word. Engines rumbled earlier than usual. Checkpoints doubled. Orders moved in whispers instead of radios. People stared out their windows and felt something shifting beneath the surface of the capital. A nation knows when power is about to change hands. Not because someone announces it. But because everything feels slightly off. As if the air itself is reconsidering its place. By the time soldiers began moving in coordinated formations across the city, the message was clear. Burkina Faso had reached the point where the old structure could no longer hold. And standing in that silent fracture was a young artillery captain, whose name had traveled through the military. Long before the world heard it. The country was not simply unstable. It was dissolving. And the only question was, who would step forward when everyone else stepped back? For years, young officers had watched the same cycle repeat. Villages attacked. Roads lost. Fighters ambushed on routes they had patrolled 100 times. Families displaced again and again until home became a memory instead of a place. Traoré had seen the reality up close. Not from an office. But from the dust of the Northern Front. He had seen bravery. And despair. And the slow erosion of a country that had run out of easy solutions. In the barracks, frustration wasn't emotion anymore. It was fuel. It became the kind of force that gathers silently until the moment it erupts. And within those ranks, the younger soldiers didn't need speeches. They didn't need promises. They just needed someone who understood the battlefield. Better than the people giving orders from far away. Traoré wasn't trying to lead them. He simply acted with the clarity that others wished leadership possessed. That clarity became gravity. And gravity pulls everything with it. When the shift finally came, it came fast. The capital tightened. Convoys repositioned. Communication channels flickered with activity. And the city watched an outcome unfold. That had been building for months behind the scenes. By noon, the balance of power had shifted completely. A captain. Not a general. Not a politician. Not a career statesman. Stood at the head of a nation. To the outside world, it was shocking. To the people inside Burkina Faso. Especially the youth. It was something closer to catharsis. Because for the first time in decades, the person speaking for the country was someone who had actually walked through its wounds. Traoré didn't celebrate. He didn't smile for cameras. He didn't bask in the moment. Because he understood something that most people never learn. Taking power is nothing. Carrying a country is everything. The weight fell on him instantly. The lives. The expectations. The desperation. The geopolitical pressure. The knife-edge balance of the entire Sahel. In that single day, He crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. He stepped into the void. And the void stepped back. When a young leader steps into power, the world does not wait. It reacts. It judges. It tries to define him before he has even defined himself. Ibrahim Traoré felt that pressure immediately. Not from his own people, but from beyond his borders. Analysts dissected every movement. Diplomats whispered behind closed doors. Foreign powers evaluated him like a variable in an unstable equation. Some claimed he was a rebel. Some claimed he was a visionary. Some feared he might reshape the entire region. Others hoped he would. But while the outside world tried to categorize him, Traoré focused on something far simpler. And far heavier. The survival of his nation. Leadership did not come to him slowly. It landed like a weight dropped from the sky. Fast, shocking, and impossible to ignore. And with each passing day, that weight grew more personal. Because every decision he made carried the lives of thousands. If the outside world moved cautiously, the youth of West Africa moved like wildfire. They saw Traoré not as a politician, but as a symbol. A living challenge to the idea that leadership belonged only to the old. Only to the powerful. Only to those raised inside political systems. Clips of him went viral. Photos of him circulated with captions like, "Africa rising. Hope has a face. Power does not wait." University students wore his image on shirts. Street artists painted murals of him on cracked concrete walls. Young soldiers saluted him with a pride that had been missing for years. To them, he represented something far larger than Burkina Faso. He represented possibility. A reminder that youth is not weakness. That strength does not require age. That courage does not wait for permission. Whether he asked for it or not. Traoré became the face of an entire generation that refused to inherit a broken world without fighting for a better one. But being a symbol carries a cost. Inside Burkina Faso, the insurgency did not slow down. Simply because a new leader appeared. The enemies were real. Entrenched, armed, ruthless. Traoré faced a war that stretched across forests, deserts, and abandoned towns. A war where the battlefield changed every week. Where alliances were uncertain. Where information was often fog. And the truth was hard to see. He needed to rebuild morale. Rebuild intelligence networks. Rebuild trust between civilians and soldiers. Rebuild confidence in the idea that the nation could still be saved. This was not politics. This was survival. Each briefing brought new challenges. Each report reminded him of the stakes. Each failure cut deeper than the last. But he kept moving. Because stopping meant accepting defeat. And defeat, for him, was not an option. While Traoré worked to stabilize his country, other nations watched with caution. Some feared instability. Some feared change. Some feared a leader who spoke openly about sovereignty. In a region long shaped by external influence, he became a point of tension. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he represented. A young leader challenging old dynamics. A military figure defying predictable patterns. A nation attempting to take ownership of its own destiny. Whether one saw him as hope or danger, no one could deny one thing. He made people pay attention. And attention is a form of power. Symbols are powerful. But behind every symbol is a human being. Traoré was not made of steel. He was not immune to exhaustion. He did not pretend to be invincible. He carried scars from the battlefield. burdens from leadership, and pressure from expectations that no young man should ever have to face alone. But he also carried something else. Something that made him rise when many others would have broken. Purpose. He did not step forward to be famous. He stepped forward because his country was collapsing. And someone had to take responsibility. When responsibility was a burning blade, he accepted that blade. He accepted its weight. And in doing so, he crossed from being just a soldier to being a force history could not ignore. Leadership is not a throne. It is a weight. And for Ibrahim Traoré, that weight pressed against him every hour of every day. He carried the fear of families who had lost everything. He carried the rage of soldiers who fought without rest. He carried the disappointment of villages that waited for rescue. And the hope of those who still believed it would come. Each sunrise brought another set of decisions that could save lives or destroy them. Each night brought sleepless hours, filled with maps, reports, and the quiet realization that even the right choices had painful consequences. But he accepted this. Because heroism is not about victory. It is about responsibility. And responsibility demands more than strength. It demands endurance. Traoré endured. Every leader who rises creates enemies in the shadows. Some feared his youth. Some feared his confidence. Some feared that he could inspire a generation that wasn't supposed to lead yet. Internal rivals circled. External powers grew uneasy. Groups in the region watched for the first mistake that would weaken him. And through all of this, the insurgency adapted. Shifting tactics. Moving deeper into the wilderness. Hiding among frightened villagers. He was fighting a war on 3 fronts. Against the militants. Against political pressure. And against time. But no matter how heavy the pressure became, his resolve did not fracture. Every threat only sharpened his focus. Every challenge only hardened his stance. Because for him, the mission was never about survival. It was about transformation. Slowly, something unexpected began to emerge. Civilians started cooperating again. Villagers returned to lands they had abandoned. Young recruits filled the barracks with renewed determination. Regions once dismissed as lost began to push back against fear. Traoré wasn't a magician. He didn't create instant peace. But he ignited something far more powerful. Momentum. Momentum is the oxygen of victory. Momentum is the shift that turns despair into direction. Momentum is the moment a nation no longer waits for rescue. Because it has chosen to stand up itself. And for the first time in years, Burkina Faso felt momentum. The country was not healed. But it had stopped bleeding. Across Africa, young people watched closely. Not because Traoré was flawless. But because he represented a new archetype. A leader forged by struggle. Not by privilege. A soldier who spoke like a citizen. Not like a politician. A voice that echoed the frustration of millions. Who felt forgotten by the systems meant to protect them. Whether or not he succeeded in every mission. His presence alone shifted the narrative of an entire continent. He became evidence that power could come from unexpected places. From dust. From conflict. From youth. From courage. Symbols matter. They change culture. They change expectation. They change the limits young people believe they have. Traoré became one of those symbols. History will judge him in its own time. It will analyze his choices. Measure his victories. And challenge his failures. But long before those books are written, one truth remains unshakable. when his country moved toward collapse. He did not look away. He did not run. He did not wait for someone older, or more powerful, or more prepared. He stepped into the fire. And that fire did not consume him. It shaped him. It burned away the young captain he once was, and forged the leader he needed to become. Whether he will be remembered as a savior or a danger is a question only time will answer. But one thing is certain. He became impossible to ignore. A force. A symbol. A reminder. That courage does not age. Does not wait. And does not ask permission. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré. A man who rose from dust. Stepped into chaos. Carried the weight of a nation. And walked into history. With fire at his back.